Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Business Crisis Support Difficult Times for Employers and Employees webinar. My name is Edward Martley and I'm Chairman for CIMA Thames Valley branch, and I will be your host for this event. We're delighted that today's webinar will be presented by Lauren McLaughlin and Jennifer Sowell, partners and employment law solicitors, Curzon Green Solicitors. Lauren and Jennifer are both partners and specialists in employment law within the employment team at Curzon Green Solicitors. Lauren is predominantly based at our city office in London and Jennifer in High Wycombe. Both are experienced in acting for employers and employees in a range of contentious and non-contentious matters. These vary from general HR advice and drafting contracts and agreements to litigating complex, multifaceted claims in the tribunals, high courts and the Employment Appeal Tribunal, including complaints relating to dismissals, pay disputes and discrimination. They sit on working parties for the Employment Lawyers Association to respond to consultations on upcoming changes in legislation. Before I hand over to the speakers, there are a few points I'd like to make. To minimise disruption, you've all been muted. If you would like to ask anything, please enter details in the question box, as there'll be a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Following this session, you will be sent a link to the recording of the webinar and a link for feedback. Thank you, and without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, CIMA delegates, and welcome to today's webinar on Business Crisis Support, Difficult Times for Employers and Employees. As per our lovely introduction, my name is Lauren McLaughlin. I'm a partner at Curzon Green Solicitors, and I specialise in employment law based in our London office. I'm joined today by Jennifer Sowell, the other partner here, who heads up our employment team. Curzon Green is ranked by Legal 500 as a leading firm for 2023, and as part of our specialist work, as has just been said, we act for both employers and employees across a wide range of matters. But today we hope to guide you through a range of issues related to business and employees in need of support at a particular time of crisis, and we'll look through a number of topics. So we're going to cover employers' legal duties, mental health and well-being, tips on managing stress, and then we will have a short question and answer. At the end, we will have some time to go through as many questions as we can, so please do put them in to submit your questions as we go through the webinar today, and we will deal with as many as we can, both practical and legal. And I'll now pass over to Jennifer to deal with our first topic.
Hi everyone, as you know, my name is Jennifer Sowell. Thank you for joining us today. Our first topic in this business crisis support session is an employer's legal duties. When preparing this talk, I confess I've been struggling as regards how employment lawyers are deigning to suggest to management accountants that they and their clients can involve themselves in strategies on how to, or even the need to, deal with in-work poverty. However, the fact is that employees who are worried about their financial position at home are less likely to be productive in the workplace, directly impacting their employers' profit margins. Recent years have seen an unprecedented global challenge in the form of COVID-19 pandemic, followed by a great resignation and sharply rising prices driven by global supply chain problems and the war in Ukraine. The cumulative impact has affected households across the world. Our UK media speaks of a cost of living crisis, and many of us are having to cut back and make changes to our lifestyles as a result of the financial impact on our household finances. Others are surviving in what is known as in-work poverty. Now, the contractual relationship between employer and employee is one based on trust, and so many employees, not just those in work poverty, are increasingly looking to their employers for additional support in this cost of living crisis. So what do I mean by in work poverty? According to the CIPD, when a working person's income after housing costs is less than 60% of the national average, they don't earn enough to meet the cost of living. In other words, they are living in poverty even though they're at work. A combination of factors can make it difficult for many working people to escape poverty. low income with pay rises failing to keep up with the cost of living, poor job quality and poor employment practices leading to financial instability, trapping people in low-paid roles, a lack of genuine two-sided flexible working practices that enable people to fit their work around their caring responsibilities and health needs, underemployment, where people work insufficient hours to cover their cost of living, financial hardship caused by unforeseen setbacks in personal circumstances such as a relationship breakdown, bereavement or illness, and the poverty premium, which traps those on lower incomes in a cycle where they pay more for goods and services. In the UK, according to government statistics published on 6th of April 2023, this definition applies to 1 in 5 working households. So what does that mean for employers? Employers' statutory duties include paying national minimum wage and ensuring that any policy of paying more than that is implemented fairly and not discriminatorily. Employers also have to comply with staff contracts, of course. Importantly, businesses do have a duty of care towards their employees and workers, many of whom will be struggling. Lauren will come on to talk about financial stress and mental health shortly. But my point is that it is widely accepted that supporting people to achieve a standard of living that is decent is an essential part of good work and responsible business. In fact, many employers are already adopting a number of good employment practices that can help protect people from poverty while bringing a whole host of benefits to the business and the workforce. So what can be done? While lots of factors are to blame for in-work poverty, and policymakers undoubtedly have an important role to play in addressing such concerns as our social security system, affordable childcare provision, consumer protection, and the rising cost of living, all employers, large and small, can play their part to make work a more reliable route out of poverty by putting in place a financial well-being policy covering 3 aspects of HR practice, including the provision of financial support, starting with a fair and livable wage, supporting in-work progression to help people increase their earning potential, and supporting financial well-being by offering and signposting benefits and financial education. The most obvious role that employers can play in supporting employees is pay them more. But with inflation and energy prices rising at worrying rates, this is easier said than done. Still, all employers can assist to tackle poverty by paying a wage that covers the real cost of living. There is a voluntary living wage, which is an hourly rate calculated according to the basic cost of living in the UK. It's higher than the government's compulsory national minimum wage, and it's set independently by the Living Wage Foundation. Around 9,000 employers in the UK have already voluntarily signed up as an accredited living wage employer, and in actual fact, many employers who are not accredited pay the voluntary rate. According to the CIPD, it's 74%. So you're aware, the current hourly national minimum wage for workers aged 23 or above is £10.42, whereas the living wage requires employers to pay £10.90 per hour or £11.95 with London waiting. There's usually no obligation on an employer to give its staff a pay rise, but that's contract dependent. A one-off bonus may be more affordable to businesses, again, dependent on the terms of employees' contracts. Some employees are entitled to an annual bonus, fixed or calculated on discretion. In real terms, an unexpected cash injection, vouchers, or an advance on wages or a bonus payment can be more helpful to staff as they balance their rising costs at home. Alternatively, or in addition to money, employers can pay benefits in kind support staff financially. I've included some common offerings on the slide, but you're all likely far more familiar with such schemes than me. In terms of non-financial support, there are other ways to assist employees to avoid or escape from in-work poverty. Employers can provide workers with the hours they want and need wherever possible, and remove any barriers that could prevent people from working more hours. Employers can give reasonable notice of shifts, with options for people to opt in if they want to be contacted when shifts are available at short notice. Employers can provide the option of more predictable hours for people who need them wherever possible. Employers can recognise the lengths to which employees often go to make shifts work, such as paying for childcare or transport, by fully compensating employees for shifts cancelled with less than 24 hours notice. Employers can ensure that any flexible or atypical working arrangements offer genuine choice and flexibility for both parties. For example, employers can ensure that employees feel able to decline shifts that don't suit them without fear of being withheld shifts in future. Employers can break down any real or perceived barriers that prevent people from earning a livable income. For example, a lack of genuine flexible working opportunities or progression opportunities. Employers can offer occupational sick pay to enable people to take time off when sick without risking their livelihood and their homes. Employers can utilise technology to assist different working practices and improve performance. Employers can introduce a financial wellness programme, which could be as simple as using an existing internal communication channel to signpost free and independent financial wellbeing advice, such as that available from the Money and Pensions Service. It could alert staff to the dangers of financial scams or remind people of the range of employee benefits that employer offers. Employers who can dedicate more resources could consider a financial education programme that targets interventions at key moments in working lives, for example, ahead of maternity leave, the purchase of a new home, or preparing for retirement. Why should employers do this? Our financial well-being depends on more than just how much we're paid. It's about feeling secure and in control, knowing you can pay the bills today, can deal with the unexpected, and are on track towards a healthy financial future. Whatever their benefits package look like, employers should make sure that they regularly remind their workforce what's on offer and how it could help. By offering employee benefits that help incomes go further, signposting relevant financial advice and guidance, and creating a safe space to talk about money worries, employers can make a big difference to people's lives. In doing so, employers will improve morale, staff engagement, with ensuing enhanced performance and productivity. Staff will be more present. They won't actively be looking for their next role because of their loyalty to the business, which has helped them regain and feel that they remain in control of their financial well-being. This will lead to less money being spent on sourcing replacements. The business will earn its reputation in the market for looking after its staff, which will attract a higher standard of employees also. A higher standard of employees means better work, and better work means more profit. So, having considered the suggestions and decided to make improvements to support employees in crisis, there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done by a business to update contracts and also to integrate new policies with those already in existence. In legal terms, even though changes are being made with the best of intentions, when implementing changes, employers need to consider how best to do so because they can frequently be met with resistance. Contractual changes need to be agreed with employees to be effective and will likely be permanent. Changes that need to be temporary are better dealt with in non-contractual policies, staff handbooks, and side letters that can be changed at any time without affecting the employment relationship. Employers will need to document any agreement reached, come what may. There are risks of unintended consequences, such as precedents being set. Recording what has been agreed should reduce those risks. Consideration also needs to be given to what will happen on termination of employment after paying bonuses or increasing the provision of benefits. Does the company want to tie in an employee after giving them a pay rise or other financial assistance? Would a clawback provision work if not? What about if it's the employer facing crisis after agreeing changes? There may be a need to remove the offerings due to future cash flow issues. It's a minefield. Businesses need to check their existing contracts and handbooks and seek professional advice before moving forwards with any of the suggestions we make. Additionally, a word of caution when dealing with pay increases, bonus awards, and also the offer of benefits in kind. When putting these in motion, employers need to be mindful to ensure that their calculation and application is fair, avoiding perceived or actual unfair treatment of certain members of the workforce, which could open an unintended can of worms and lead to claims for indirect or direct discrimination and or claims under the equal pay legislation. Employers need to avoid gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps. Transparency and careful recording of the decision-making process assists employers to do so. Some employers may consider banding as a fair method of awarding pay rises. Even so, by law, employees must get equal pay for doing equal work, and that is equal pay. Equal pay law says that that's the same, similar, equivalent, or of equal value. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Equal pay law applies to pay and contractual terms and conditions, including basic salary, pension, working hours, annual leave allowance and the holiday pay, overtime, sick pay, performance-related pay, for example, a bonus in an employment contract, benefits, for example, gym membership, company car. And I could go on. Perhaps we could do another talk on this subject in its own right another day. In any case, employers can offer staff a financial well-being programme at the very least, or better still, implement one of the financial education programmes that I discussed just now. Over to Lauren.
Thanks, Jennifer. So that was a very interesting overview, which gives us some food for thought about how the financial crisis can intertwine with employees' contractual rights and, of course, some legal pitfalls to consider. We'll now move on to look at the impact of financial stress in the workforce and the importance of mental health. So, Jennifer has looked at the legal contractual considerations, but an employer's duties extend to more general matters of health and safety and the well-being of its workforce. The starting point is that an individual, whilst they're at work, whether at home or in the office, remotely, is under the employer's duty of care. The key points, as you'll see highlighted in the box, are that an employer must, under common law, provide and maintain a safe place of work and a safe system of working. Under statute, so we've got the Management of Health and Safety at Work Act, an employer has a general duty to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety and welfare of its employees. So really quite broad. If they do breach these provisions, they are at risk of certain actions and claims in the courts. Employers must conduct risk assessments to cover work, again, office and at home. Employers need to consider the type of work that employees are doing, what equipment is needed to carry out that work safely, and how they can report any issues. Most of the time, the risks to workers will be fairly low, and actions employers need to take to protect those employees ought to be fairly straightforward. However, it is important to conduct adequate and thorough risk assessments, which think about mental health issues as well as physical issues. These should be kept up to date. So employers should review their risk assessments when they suspect, for instance, they're no longer valid, or where there's been a significant change, such as new office premises, new systems brought into place, or an employee with a new health disclosure. An employer needs to provide, under law, comprehensible and relevant information to employees about any risks identified by the risk assessment and what they're going to do about it, so what measures they're going to implement as a result. Employers also need to have a health and safety policy. It should be up to date and needs to be in writing. This is obligated in law for all employers with 5 or more employees. An employer also has a duty to bring this policy or statement to the attention of its employees. They can't just put something together fairly meaningless and not flag it to the workforce. Although an employer with fewer than 5 employees is not obligated to have such a document, it is obviously sensible to think about and put something in place. This is in order to improve health and safety generally. As most of you will have received on Sunday, the government have considered notifications via mobile phones for national emergencies. Reading this across into updated staff policies, we've recently seen employers actually update health and safety policies to cover this type of instance, and in particular to cover pandemic alerts and explaining how the organisation will act in accordance with official health guidance. So the key takeaway on duties, employers are responsible for their staff's health and safety. Adequate health and safety risk assessments must be conducted. Do you have a health and safety policy? If so, is it meaningful? Can the health and safety approach be generally improved? Many people think of health and safety as physical matters, protective clothing in the workplace, hazards and so on, but now more so than ever, mental health is at the forefront of everyone's minds. The focus ought to include that, and mental health should be treated with the same importance as physical health. The Health and Safety Executive, HSE, defines stress as an adverse reaction people have to excessive pressures. Financial pressures can lead to stress at work. Now, stress itself is not identified as a standalone medical condition. However, it still can be serious and can manifest itself in health conditions such as anxiety or depression. There can be physical side effects too, for instance, heart disease. Going further, I've seen employees diagnosed actually with acute stress disorder, which is a recognised illness in itself. HSE sets standards for employers to adhere to, one of which is support, which is relevant to mental health. HSE say employers must have the policies and procedures we just talked about in place, systems in place to help staff be managed. Employers need to know what support is available and how to access it, and they should receive regular and constructive feedback. ACAS, ACAS, have also provided leading guidance for dealing with mental health in particular and how to manage it. That's a really important place to start for employers and employees. Generally, an employer needs to be recognising what mental health is, identifying causes of it in the workplace, recognising and tackling stigma, and trying to provide support and building a culture. If an employer fails to support and take adequate steps, it could be liable to claims, as we mentioned, stress at work, breaches of health and safety at work legislations, but it could also lead to resignations, constructive dismissals, and discrimination claims, which we will come on to. The ACAS guidance suggests, therefore, that employers seem to be doing the best, should improve awareness. So we think this could mean training, policies, articles, sharing links, have effective people management in place. Is the business leading from the top? Is your mental health being put as a priority? And do you offer mental health days? Tackle the cause of work-related mental health. To get to the cause, we need to be listening to staff, considering grievances, conducting surveys. Is workload particularly excessive? Is financial stress becoming a wide issue now? Do you have ways that employees can bring this to attention? In terms of culture, we've thought about drop-in meetings, confidential email addresses, and trained staff members. And in terms of support, when we do have someone who's off with mental health illness, what adjustments have we considered? Have we looked at options to support them? And remember that although the employer can listen to the employee's medical advice, it is not the medical expert. So the employer should be guided by occupational health, by doctor's fit notes, and be sure not to make assumptions. Can financial stress or anxiety be a disability? The answer is yes. Under the Equality Act 2010, there is a test which covers mental impairments. It's two-limbed, so does it have a substantial effect, which means more than minor or trivial? This, an example, could be something taking longer than it usually would to complete a daily task, such as getting dressed. Long term tends to mean that it has lasted or is likely to last 12 months or more. This can be quite difficult if employees are in their early stages. So again, medical evidence could be sought to try and get a prognosis. In some cases, it could be very obvious that an employee is disabled, but in other cases, it may be necessary or prudent to obtain this medical evidence. Our advice in borderline cases is simply to proceed on the basis that the employee is disabled. If an employee is disabled in the eyes of the law, they are covered under the Equality Act 2010. So how and what does this mean? An employee who is disabled under the Equality Act has enhanced rights and protections. Disabled employees can bring claims against their employer if they are treated poorly for various types of discrimination, which you can see on your slide. There is no minimum qualifying period for this type of claim, and there is no upper limit on compensation which can be awarded. It will usually include an award for injury to feelings. Therefore, it is vital that employers ensure they deal with disabled employees, those who meet the definition or who may meet the definition, reasonably, fairly and in line with the law. Otherwise, they could face a costly claim. So looking at the types of discrimination, first of all, we've got direct discrimination. It's where someone is put at a disadvantage and treated less favourably because of their disability, compared to someone without that disability. We can see an example on the slide. So Mo has a job interview, he's offered the job. Mo then discloses his depression. The employer withdraws the job offer and doesn't explain why, even after Mo has asked. The job is offered to 3 other people. If the employer's reason for withdrawing that job offer to Mo is because he disclosed his depression, it is likely he has a direct discrimination claim. This does apply to applicants as well as employees. We've got indirect disability, which is a little bit more subtle. This is where there is a provision, criterion or practice which applies to everyone equally, but puts someone who suffers from a particular disability at a particular disadvantage. So employers can justify this type of discrimination in some circumstances. You'll see in the example on the slide that Sarah's employers has introduced a new shift pattern which involves working late in the evening. On the face of it, this is fair, it's applied to everyone. However, Sarah has acute stress disorder. She takes medication which makes her sleepy and lethargic in the evenings. She's not able to work late shifts. This decision is likely to be indirect discrimination because it puts Sarah at a particular disadvantage. The employer could justify it, but it needs to show why it has good reason for this and that this is appropriate and necessary. We've got a positive duty in the Equality Act to make reasonable adjustments in the workplace to alleviate or remove disadvantage suffered by a disabled worker. This could be physical changes to the workplace or equipment, changes to how processes or systems are run. As a sensible starting point, employers faced with someone who is potentially disabled under the Act would be to review any fitness to work certificate from the employer's GP, as this will often include common advice on returning to work, phased returns, or any other reasonable adjustments that ought to be made. Equally, when running processes, employers ought to consider the disability and what changes they might need to make to those. Again, a failure to make reasonable adjustments could result in a claim and liability. In this example, Sylvie has depression. She's been absent from work for several periods. There's now a redundancy round and the employer is considering absences as part of its selection of who to make redundant. This obviously puts Sylvie at a large disadvantage. Our advice here would be that the employer could make reasonable adjustments to discount disability related absences when looking at the redundancy selection. Importantly, the employer should have recorded in the first instance the reason for the absence, and that's where return to work interviews could be very important. Another provision is discrimination arising from disability. It means someone is treated unfavourably or put at a disadvantage, not because of the disability itself, but because of something as a result of the disability. So for example, John's disability causes him to have more sickness absence. The business could have made a reasonable adjustment here rather than disciplining John because of the number of absences he has had. The adjustment that could have made was to again discount those disability related absences, or decided not to trigger the disciplinary process where the absences could be related to his disability. So in terms of the value of these types of claims, injury to feelings is a compensatory award of damages which the tribunal can award to the employee for stress and anxiety suffered from the discriminatory treatment. It's considered separately from any claim for financial loss. Tribunals ultimately have discretion as to the amount of this compensation, but they should consider the vento bands, which you will see on your screen. Three bands, which range from 1,100 right up to over £56,200 in the most serious cases. Obviously, these are the most exceptional awards capable of exceeding that, and it tends to be that more commonly awards fall in the lower or middle band. Thinking about stress and performance, in addition to discrimination claims, failing to deal with stress in the workplace poses a risk to business in terms of higher sickness absence, reduced productivity, and therefore poor performance. Poor performance from stress can include uncharacteristic errors, loss of motivation, lapse in memory, increased time at work. None of this is good for the employee nor for the employer's business. But employers need to be mindful of how they deal with these in terms of doing formal performance improvement plans and processes. Due consideration must be given to mental health and whether this is an underlying factor for the poor performance. If it is, the employer should consider the cause. Is it work that has caused the stress? Is it financial stress? Any additional support needed, and should proceed on the basis, as we've said, that there is a potential disability here. So what adjustments can we make to the process? Can triggering duties be absorbed elsewhere? Can the employee work in a different way? And do we actually need to change or lengthen our performance process? In the example above, Rohit is disciplined for outbursts of anger and a drop in performance. The employer never investigated this properly, so did not realise or have any records that Rohit was suffering from extreme anxiety for many months. Rohit had tried to seek support, but the manager didn't listen. So had regular performance reviews taken place and these open channels of communication being used properly, reasonable adjustments may have been made and this could have been dealt with better. The dismissal of an employee on performance grounds, where the performance may be as a result of a mental ill health or stress, could result in a claim for unfair dismissal, up to a year's pay, or more if discrimination can be proven, so it could be very costly. In a similar vein with a disciplinary matter, mental health must be considered. In the previous example, as we said, the anger outbursts could be treated as conduct in a disciplinary matter run. So the employer ought to have considered the mental health disclosures and dealt with those properly. In terms of these types of meetings, we have seen employers be open to employees taking mental health support workers to these types of disciplinary meetings, which is not usually set out in law. Consideration given to whether the employee is fit and able to actually attend meetings in person. And medical advice should ideally be obtained. The employee could also raise a grievance formally if they feel they've been treated poorly because of a disability in a performance improvement plan, in a disciplinary or in any sort of process. Mental health and illness can result in stress and sickness absence. In terms of stats, you'll see that according to a CIPD survey, 17.9 million working days were lost to stress, anxiety or depression in 2020. Employers are suffering with reduced workforce, the need to cover absences and workload, and employees are suffering because they may have lost pay if they're on statutory pay and so on. However, if someone is sick, they do need to be able to rest, recover, and consideration on how much contact they are receiving while off sick needs to be looked at. You should check your stress, sickness, absence policy. You should consider return to work interviews, and you should consider the employee's medical advice. It is a balance between keeping in touch with the employee, given the employer's duty of care, and not aggravating the employee's illness. A frequent FAQ we have is whether an employee can be dismissed because they are off for stress for a quite long period of time. It's common that a GP might sign you off sick, but your employer is not obliged to keep your job available open to you on an open-ended basis. Your employer could ultimately dismiss you fairly for long-term sickness absence. or if they consider that you're no longer capable of carrying out your role. However, they must follow a fair process. This means that the underlying reasons for the absence should be investigated. If there is signs of stress-related illness, expert medical advice should be obtained. And this could be through your own medical team or occupational health or a team appointed by your employer. And it may be that stress is down to a way that you've been treated by your manager or overloading of work. So that does need to be looked into so that the employer can try and solve that. Again, reasonable adjustments should be considered. If it does not prove possible, your employer ultimately may be justified in dismissing you based on your illness. This is a fair reason for dismissal, but it should be a last resort. So a fair process must have been followed, and if not, there's a potential unfair dismissal claim and discrimination. Again, uncapped award and injury to feelings. And finally, just looking at how we recognise poor mental health, there are obviously legal and moral reasons to ensure employers recognise poor mental health in the workplace. Not everyone shows these signs of poor mental health, and it's very important not to make assumptions, as we said. So some possible signs are on your slide: appearing tired, anxious, changes in standards of work, changes in usual behaviour or mood. It can be harder to spot these signs if employees are working from home or remotely. Therefore, it's important for employers to regularly ask their employees how they're doing and check in. Management should be trained in spotting these issues quite delicately and sensitively. And we'll deal with some top tips on this next as I pass you back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Laura. I've already discussed some financial and non-financial strategies which employers can implement to help employees avoid or escape from financial stress. So now I'm going to run through some other ideas, starting with communication, which is always key in a relationship. So it's important to check in regularly and promote open communication to encourage employees to access help when they need it. Those involved in HR within a business should use internal communication channels to regularly discuss money issues and to signpost support. Of course, by increasing our own awareness of the drivers of in-work poverty and how it can affect people's lives, we're better placed to make our communications relevant and relatable. Managers need to be in regular communication with staff. Absences, disengagement are signs of stress, as we've just heard, and they should not be ignored. Also, involving employees in the development of the business's financial wellbeing strategy can help break down barriers. There are a variety of mechanisms to engage with staff, like surveys, forums, polls, web chats. And the data collected can help employers design and refine their financial wellbeing policies, as well as assess their effectiveness. And line managers play an important role in spotting financial distress and signposting support, but they shouldn't provide financial advice themselves. So we say employers should train line managers to regularly and sensitively check in with their team's overall well-being, but bear in mind that every employee's financial circumstances are incredibly personal, and many staff will be reluctant to talk. Staff will only confide in their managers about their financial worries if they can trust them to be non-judgmental and helpful. Employers should also consider cost-effective support for staff. So one of the steps to address work-related stress and mental well-being in the workplace is having an employee assistance program, which is a subscription whereby the employer pays for all its staff to have access to a 24/7 confidential helpline that they can call in times of stress. Providers offer online resources, wellbeing content, lots of free apps and policies, etc., to help businesses support employees through poor physical or mental health issues or issues with financial and emotional wellbeing. Such services obviously come at a cost to the business, which not all businesses can afford. And while they're a good way for employers to defend tribunal claims, showing that they've offered services to employees, EAP is often cited in letters we receive from companies responding to grievances, and we've seen employers giving a good answer that they have sought to support their staff. Smaller businesses may not be able to cover the cost. So a tip is to perhaps check if their current network, the business's current network, offers support for employees in the way of free webinars and publications, etc. Other ideas include signposting, if not paying for financial advice, which can assist. There's currently a free of charge occupational health pilot, which SMEs can take advantage of. That's been trialled before, it didn't work, so take advantage whilst you can. Employer can set out their approach towards stress and mental well-being in a policy, as we've discussed. Staff then have a central reference point where they can be directed to resources. And as I've said, creating a safe place to talk about money worries. Employers can make a big difference to people's lives. Employers need to do this because they want to stay competitive and retain talent. They should pay fairly, they should be transparent about how pay is set and how people can secure a pay rise, communicating both directly to the employees and also through unions and employee representatives where appropriate. All job vacancies should clearly advertise the salary or the wage range to demonstrate an organisation's commitment to transparency. Employers should ensure that pay outcomes and processes in their organisations are fair, such as checking the reasons for any gaps in gender, ethnicity or disability. And again, engaging with unions or employee representative groups as relevant. Employers need to support in work progression. If employees can see progression paths and clear ways of being promoted, they can add value to the business and in turn see enhancements or to pay or benefits, and the businesses will retain their talent. Ways to promote in work progression include mentoring, clear promotion plans, shadowing, supporting professional development, encouraging managers in their organisations to support employees' personal needs. It does need to be feasible and achievable within the business needs, and it may be that employers can only offer some of these elements, not others. Any decision making in this respect should be recorded for record keeping. Employers need to treat mental health matters with the importance that they merit. Mental Health First Aid is a programme that teaches first aiders how to help a person who's experiencing varying degrees of worsening mental health issues. Like traditional first aid, Mental Health First Aid does not teach people to treat or diagnose mental health or substance use conditions. Instead, the training teaches people how to offer initial support until appropriate professional help is received or until the crisis resolves. Mental health first aiders can recognise those that may be experiencing poor mental health and provide them with first level support and early intervention. Mental health first aiders can encourage a person to identify and access sources of professional help and other supports. Mental health first aiders can practice active listening and empathy. They can have a conversation with improved mental health literacy around language and stigma. A mental health champion could also be appointed as someone who will raise awareness in the business, implement strategy, and be actively available to provide advice and support, a point of contact. However, it should be recognised that while staff should be encouraged to speak to a mental health champion, they may find it easier to speak to somebody who's not a manager. And this is where designated colleagues, being mental health first aiders, can assist. So having a designated first aider and champion demonstrates a real sense of company support and is good for morale, retaining staff and recruitment, and showing mental health is going to be dealt with as important as physical health. In that vein, employers should put in place a mental health plan. In addition to mental health first aiders and champions, employers can and should build a plan to develop mental health awareness among employees. For example, create an accessible document and share this via internal communications. Encourage open conversations about mental health and the support available when employees are struggling. Appropriate workplace adjustments should be offered to employees who need them, right from the recruitment process and then throughout employment at regular intervals, because our health gets better and worse. Employers should promote effective people management through line managers and supervisors. All staff should have regular conversations about their health with their organisational leader, who should in turn be trained in effective management practices. It's important to routinely monitor employee mental health and well-being. As I've said, the state of our health is fluid. Employers can look at their sickness absence data. They should ensure that return to work interviews are conducted with employees after a period of time off. Information and signposting can be provided collectively in team meetings. Trust can be gained and maintained by way of one-to-one meetings with staff. Employers can use staff surveys, which have the advantage of being able to be processed with a degree of anonymity. Employers could consider a monthly drop-in or a weekly brew-up to get people talking. As I said earlier, communication is key in relationships, particularly in dealing with times of stress.
Thank you, Jennifer. So that was some very helpful and practical top tips. They're sure to give us all some good food for thought when whether we're thinking of this from the eyes of the employer or the employee. Just a few final points before we move on to our short question and answer section. The contents of today's presentation is up to date as far as possible. You should always check the up-to-date position, and if in doubt, always take timely and professional advice on your situation. We have a few questions which we'll turn to, but in the meantime, on the screen you can see our contact details, and we'd be pleased to hear from you with any further comments on anything raised by the contents of today's webinar. But yeah, we'll just move straight to a couple of questions, and please do send any more that you have through. So the first question we've had is, what is the situation in terms of employers' responsibility where one or more staff members may be off sick, and this can cause more stress and additional workload on the remaining team members? That's a common, I understand that. And during times where they've got budget constraints and where additional resources, at least in the short-term basis, are not an option. That's a good question. I mean, it's a difficult one.
Several questions.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot to it, and unfortunately, there is no perfect answer to that, other than trying to deal with it with all those things in mind. So you've got rights of the individual off sick and their right to be treated fairly, their health and safety be considered, and if someone signed off sick, they can't be pressured or forced to work where medical evidence is saying that they are unable to. In terms of that burden on the other team members, fully understand that that's really difficult, and that's where processes such as absence processes for employers to run where someone's long-term sick. So that might not provide an immediate answer because processes take time, and we need to give the employee opportunity to look at when are they able to come back to work. Will it be a phased return? Can they take small steps? But I would say it goes back to the point that communication is key. And is there a way that this employee can start to take on certain tasks? Is something particularly triggering that they can't do? What are we looking at in terms of coming back to support others? In terms of the other team members, their duty, their care, you're under a duty of care for them too. So they cannot be exposed to excessive burden. So it may be a business has to pause certain pieces of work. It may say that new inquiries, new contacts, new customers cannot be taken on for a short period of time. But of course, it's balancing that against running a successful business. So it's a difficult one, and it's weighing it all up, and I think coming up with a plan that supports everybody, because your employees that are burdened have got legal rights too, and they can't just be overworked. Otherwise you face the same types of claims, and you could actually end up with a full team off sick. Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, so just in the medium term, you talked about long term. Short term, we are going to have to cover colleagues' work. Medium term is the business needs to think about changing the budgets around and potentially getting in locum or temporary staff to cover cases of long-term sickness absence. It'd be in the medium term. I would say that would be a duty that I would expect an employer to abide by.
Yeah. We've had a question, had a few. So How does long COVID get recognised? Is it considered a disability? That's a really good one. It is a very topical issue. Long COVID, we don't actually know huge amounts about, a lot about, but generally it's becoming more prevalent, and we're seeing, and we have actually dealt with some employees with this types of medical evidence. So yes, it could absolutely be a disability if it satisfies the test. So is it substantial? And sometimes from cases that I've read, it can be where there's serious fatigue, brain fog issues that can have substantial impact on you day to day. And it can absolutely last, or may last, a year or more. And we're looking, you know, you can do that just on a time period. Where are we at and how long since the diagnosis? So it would depend on medical evidence about the length of it, but it's likely that it could be considered a disability. And I think at least now going forward, we're probably going to see a lot more cases in the tribunal related to long COVID being a disability. So discrimination type claims where reasonable adjustments are not put in place to help sufferers.
So the next question, what about paying somebody more for a job because they have more experience and knowledge than, I think that should be someone new to the role. Sorry. That's a little bit off topic. If we're talking about pay transparency here, and with pay banding, perhaps, which I touched on, if there's a real justification to give somebody more money than somebody else who's doing the same role, then in order to attract talent, that would potentially be not discriminatory. So, but you'd need to document the decision making and as to why there is a gap between the two people's pay.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got risks of equal pay, you know, if someone's doing the exact same work of an opposite gender, and you've got potential risk around discrimination if it's one sex being paid differently to another, or something that you could prove. But yeah, you'd need to know a little bit more about the comparator and the business reasons.
Mm-hmm. Do rules change when you go from under 50 employees to over? In terms of helping financial well-being, I would say no. Lauren, would you agree?
No, yeah, agreed. You know, the employer duties apply whether you've got one employee or 100, the duty of care and the risks for the employer. So no, and it just generally should become more and more important now, the taking care of your employees' health, including mental health. We've also got a question, what is the best way of approaching my employer if I'm struggling with household bills? What might they be able to do? So there's a number of things. I mean, the starting point is, you know, your employer doesn't have, as Jennifer confirmed earlier, any particular legal obligation to offer pay rises or enhance your benefits package unless it's set out in your contract, and that would be, we don't see that much. We see, you might at minimum see, or at most, sorry, see a discretionary annual pay review maybe. So looking at what Jennifer touched on earlier, employers could consider things such as pay advances. Maybe they will be able to pay your salary a little bit earlier. If there's something due to you in a number of months or weeks, a bonus or some sort of other award that you're due, could they bring that forward? Employers should, and both parties should, consider about documenting that, and what happens if you get that pay advance and then leave, or get that pay and then engage in some gross misconduct. So there's a little bit of thinking. In terms of approaching and the best way to do that, Jennifer, what do you think?
Well, hopefully your employer is having sort of communication channels, they're already open. So we talked about the brew up, we've talked about monthly meetings. There should be a policy in place, hopefully, that directs you in terms of those communications. But if you don't feel confident in having a discussion face to face, you could use the tool that your employer uses to communicate in writing, so email or another platform. Just on that, if you're an employer though, I want to remind people that have both sides of the fence that anything that's given in advance needs to be documented, and companies would need to consider whether they're given just out of generosity, or whether they're tied in, or they can be clawed back in the case of redundancy or resignation, etc. Because there's no point in a business helping out its employees so much so that it's no longer a profitable business and then nobody gets paid. So
okay, and I think we've just got probably have time for one final question that's just come through. So is there any precedent or protection for team members, whether or not they're vaccinated, who are regularly exposed in the office to someone not COVID vaccinated? So someone who's caught it twice so far, and they need to be off work each time. What can the team manager do to help? So there is we go back to the employer's duties of care and making a safe environment for everyone to work in. There was a lot of legal and just general consideration about vaccinations and being forced and not forced to have vaccinations and policies, which is kind of settled now, given the rules have relaxed. So we're not seeing sort of these policies that no vaccination, no entry, although that was something at a particular time. I'd imagine that this isn't, you don't have a specific policy dealing with that at this workplace. So in terms of protection, I think it's developing and looking at the impact of the risk to others and just acting in best practice. So if someone's got COVID and off sick, have you got rules in place about when they're going to come back in, and how many tests must they do? It is a thing. So we do see employers with updated sickness absent policies and COVID policies saying we do need 2 negative tests before you come back, and otherwise it's remote work because you've got a duty to look after everyone else, and you don't want the whole office or workplace going down with COVID.
Yeah, I think that's a point. If I was a team manager, I would insist on people that are poorly not coming into work, because one person is easy to manage without, but a whole host of team members is absolutely not. So I think we are going to have to come to an end of this Q&A shortly. I'm conscious that the clock is going down and we have to finish promptly at past.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Lauren and Jennifer. That was very informative and a lot to think about. And thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Some admin, you'll receive an email in a few hours' time, which will include links to a recording of the webinar, a link to a copy of the presentation slides, and a feedback survey link. We'd be very grateful if you take a few moments to give us your feedback online. And thanks again, Lauren and Jennifer, for a very interesting talk. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.